Just want to say really quickly that if the intros of these videos feel a lot shorter than normal, where it feels like I'm really blowing through them, my apologies. It's just that over these next few videos, the last ones of this series, I'm going to have so many games to talk about that I don't really want to waste as much time talking about what such and such third party was doing, or whether a first party manufacturer really had nothing that interesting in a year other than just the games they were putting out. I know that context can be important, but the videos are called my favorite games of the given year, so given that I'm going to be spending a lot of time talking about the games themselves, I just don't want to waste that much more time. So with that in mind, welcome back to I Want to Talk About, the series where I take a topic, I sit on camera, and I blabber about it. And as you can tell from the title, we are back with the series within a series. Today, I want to talk about my favorite games of 2017. You know how it goes at this point. I get into an intro where I talk about the landscape of gaming at the time, although again, I'm going to very much shorten it this time around. And in terms of the games, I get into the notable snubs, the games that I didn't play in a given year, the games that I did play that I would consider to be just missed the cut kind of games, like 7 out of 10 type games. The cream before the crop, which were games that on my personal scale would be like an 8 or 9 out of 10. And then my proper best list of 10 out of 10 games. And again, we got a lot of games to talk about this year, so let's just jump right in. 2017, as a year in gaming, full stop, I'm going to say probably one of my favorite years in gaming, point blank period. In terms of the sheer number of games, what a year 2017 was. In terms of the consoles that were coming out in 2017 and how the manufacturers were doing, Sony was kind of just staying the course with the PS4 and just continuing to release quality games. By this point, they were really kind of like the big front runner in the console market. Xbox came along with the Xbox One X in a bid to compete with the PlayStation 4 Pro and offer gamers true 4K gaming. I prefer frame rates myself. Though the one big news that I will talk about that might be a little rambly from 2017 was Nintendo, because 2017 was the year where Nintendo had its big "we are so fucking back" moment. You see the shirt, Joy-Con boys, RIP to Etika. 2017 was the year of the Nintendo Switch. For years, we were hearing about the NX, NX this, NX that. What the hell is Nintendo's next console, the NX? And it turned out it was this. A hybrid platform that was one part portable, one part console. It had a dock that you can put the thing in and it displays on your TV, or you can take it out of the dock and play it portably. And the controllers that came with it would drift all the time. I mean, they would detach from the tablet, and you can play with either two controllers or just kind of turn one sideways and play with it like that. Or totally ignore the Joy-Cons and buy a Pro Controller because the Pro Controllers are way better. Sure as hell what I did. So in general, after the Wii U, this was basically everything the Wii U should have been. A mix of console and portable that was much more powerful than the Wii U. Obviously, it was still kind of outdated when it came out, but at least it was powerful enough to run then modern games, even current modern games, I'd say. Enough that it would get great third-party support throughout its life. Nintendo's marketing of it was so much better, unlike the Wii U where they basically had to give people checklists telling them the differences between the Wii and the Wii U. The Switch was pretty clearly communicated, and its concept was also very clearly communicated as well. And Nintendo helped their case by putting out an incredible lineup of first-party games. They've continued to be the kings in that regard, putting out a ton of high-quality games, and a good quantity of them as well, compared to the Wii U especially. So in a lot of ways, the Switch was kind of what the Wii U should have been, but it's become a huge cultural touchstone that is one of the highest selling gaming systems, and I'm pretty sure it's fairly close to becoming the highest selling. And it's a fantastic system, one of my favorites. I absolutely love the Switch, although I can't really play mine as much now because the fan is really loud and it kind of annoys me, but the Switch is still a fantastic platform, and this thing made me excited to be a Nintendo fan all over again. I lived through the Wii U era, and I was a hardcore fan then, but the Switch made me all the more excited to be a Nintendo fan all over again. Now, if only Nintendo would just announce the next system already. Oh, and in 2017, Nintendo did also release the new Nintendo 2DS XL. Is that an iPhone they use for the top screen? As far as third-party stuff, Club Penguin shut down. That was pretty sad. And Private Division formed, a company that funds quite a few indie games, a few of which we will talk about as this series moves along. I might not make that explicitly known, but just know that we will be talking about them. Yeah, like I said, I wanted to get through that intro really fast because I want to get into the games. There are plenty to talk about. We do have a few notable snubs worth mentioning as well. A few big games that I didn't really play. One of them being Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I'm just bringing that up because, again, I've never really played the Xenoblade series, but obviously these games are super well liked, and this was the point where Xenoblade was starting to kind of get more mainstream appeal. And pretty much the biggest one is Persona 5, which was roundly considered one of 2017's best games, and it's a game I hear so many people talk about, but this style of game just doesn't really do much for me, so I didn't really play it myself. But I respect it from afar. As far as the just missed the cut games, the games that would be like a 7 out of 10 on my scale, we actually have quite a few here. Again, I played a lot of games in 2017, and there was a lot that I liked. So to try to blow through them as quickly as I can, we have Kingdom Hearts HD 2.8 Final Chapter Prologue. It was nice to have Dream Drop Distance on a console, and the Fragmentary Passage was a nice little gameplay demo leading up to Kingdom Hearts 3. But the overall package is nowhere near as essential as KH1 or 2. There was also Bendy and the Ink Machine, one of the most fascinating games I've played in terms of lore and writing, and perhaps one of the only mascot horror games that I actually get behind, but its gameplay does lag in a few areas compared to the writing. A quick re-release, Bulletstorm Full Clip Edition, a nice little touch-up of a fine enough game, just don't expect it to radically change how you feel about Bulletstorm, obviously. There was Uncharted The Lost Legacy, by way of just being kind of an expansion to Uncharted 4. It's both very good and also not that much different, and I also hated that kind of open world segment in Chapter 4. Fuck that shit. One that might surprise you, Sonic Forces, a game I actually liked a fair bit more than almost any other Sonic fan will tell you, even though I do understand everyone's issues with it, and given that I haven't played it in a long time, I might hate it if I go back to it now. Weird to mention a port, but I do also want to shout out Doom's Switch re-release, because this was the impossible port, and I think this really showed where Nintendo was with the Switch, that they were able to get this onto the Switch. Naturally, corners had to be cut, and it's not the first version of the game I'd recommend, but it's a miracle they even squished this thing onto the Switch in the first place, and it actually does a fairly good job. And thankfully, that's the last just missed the cut game I have to talk about. There's nothing super beloved that everyone absolutely adored that I only put in the just missed the cut section. Oh yeah, about that. I'm sorry, but I will stand on it. If I stopped playing Nier Automata after getting ending A, my score would have been much higher, and we'd be talking about it in the cream before the crop. But as it is, it unfortunately got a little too repetitive for my liking when going for the other endings, which I was told I should do. So that kind of took away from the buzz a little bit. The gameplay is definitely very creative and the meta elements are cool, but it's definitely far from my favorite thing Platinum Games has ever done. Oh, and I did say that I would blow through remasters from the cream before the crop section before actually getting into the proper cream before the crop, but this one we only have one to mention, and that's just Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5 plus 2.5 Remix. It was just a repackaging of the two collections, with the big advantage being that all of them were now in 60 frames per second. Now, that's honestly a godsend, and to me it made the package worth picking up, which makes it a very good thing that it's available on most modern platforms. But again, if you had 1.5 and 2.5 on the PS3, you were probably fine with those. Oh, and there is going to be one more collection that I'll mention later, but since I'll have a bit more to say about it, I'll save it. So now we can get into the cream before the crop, the games that I would give an 8 or 9 out of 10 to, and hopefully now I could stop talking so fast. I'm sorry if it feels like I have. I'm not trying to just rush everything out, it just I happen to be talking fast. I'm excited. 2017's a year that I love in terms of gaming. So let's get into the cream before the crop games. Oh no! I'm talking about Injustice 2 when I never talked about the first game. Whoopsie. But yes, I played Injustice 2 without ever playing the first one. I'm a fraud. My brother ended up picking this up back in 2017, largely out of a combination of him being really into DC and also really enjoying Mortal Kombat X quite a bit. And I too ended up playing it with him and eventually playing through the story mode myself, even though I didn't play the first one. And I ended up really enjoying myself with it. NetherRealm had a real knack for making a very tight, compelling fighting game, and Injustice 2 is just another mechanically sound and incredibly fun title from them. There were definitely some weird elements to the story here and there, but all in all, it was a tight fighting game with plenty of content worth playing whether you were a Mortal Kombat fan or a DC fan. It's a bit strange that there was never a third Injustice game after this one. I thought I heard rumors that there was going to be, but I guess they're too busy making Mortal Kombat. And also giving into WB Games' incessant urges to throw microtransactions into everything. Gross. This was the other remaster collection I was alluding to earlier, and I think I'm giving it its own entry because it just makes a bit more sense. After 2008's Crash Mind Over Mutant, the Crash Bandicoot series sat on ice for nearly a decade, with a few attempts at a revival going south very quickly. Looking at you, Crash Landed. And fans of Crash Bandicoot would cling to whatever they could in hope that Crash would be coming back, whether that be a fake website, a poster at Vicarious Visions' office that was apparently for a canceled game, a rumor that Sony bought back the rights to the franchise, a fake Amazon France listing, a t-shirt at a PlayStation showcase. Fans would grasp at anything in hopes of a Crash revival. And then it finally happened. E3 2016 rolled along, and during Sony's incredible showcase, one of the best E3 shows I think I've ever seen, the t-shirt wearing man himself, Sean Layden, got to announce that the original Crash trilogy would be fully remastered for the PlayStation 4. It would eventually come to other consoles, but for the first year it was a PlayStation 4 exclusive, befitting Crash Bandicoot's origins on the original PlayStation. And sure, a new game would have been nice, but the sheer fact that Activision was willing to bring Crash back at all was honestly pretty special, as was the potential to introduce a younger generation to Cold Hard Crash, and Slippery Climb, and the High Road. Ah! Sorry, where was I? Ah yes, the Insane trilogy had a chance to appeal to longtime players and also bring in new ones, and that's what it did. And in a lot of ways, it was interesting that it kind of felt like a remaster plus of sorts, keeping the spirit of the original games but still making major improvements and overhauling the visuals in a pretty huge way. I just finished replaying this collection when it came to Xbox Game Pass a few months back, and it's just as good as ever. It's great to have the orange marsupial on modern platforms, and if you haven't grabbed this yet, what are you waiting for? Do it! Nintendo introduced a new IP during the Wii U era, and it actually became big enough to carry over to the Switch. And by carry over, I mean absolutely explode in sales. Splatoon 2, if you know you know, was one of the first games announced for the Switch as soon as that first reveal trailer hit, and to be honest, at the time I was happy to see Splatoon continue, especially because I would finally beat the first game just a few months later, but I was kind of confused when I first saw the gameplay. It looked very similar to the first game to the point where I wondered if it would just be better to label it as Splatoon Deluxe or something like that, though in hindsight Nintendo probably just thought that not enough people played the first since it was trapped on the Wii U. Plus the foundation of that game was strong enough that they could probably just stick with what made it work in a sequel. And that's mostly what they did, though the overall craftsmanship was still strong here. Nintendo still brought a lot of polish to the table with the game and managed to build something that was still incredibly fun to play, even if it was very similar to the first one. I think it also helps Splatoon's case that at the time and even now there's not much else on the market like it, so even if it doesn't radically change much, it can skimp by a little more because the gameplay loop is still fresh, kids and squids, and it hasn't been beaten to death by every other developer just looking to make a quick buck. So ultimately, even if the Splatoon sequels have become a little samey, they can kinda eke by a little bit more than some others would. I still like the first Splatoon a bit more, but all in all, Splatoon 2 is still great fun and well worth your time. Well, I mean, it was when it came out. Splatoon 3 might be the easier buy now, but you know what I mean. Don't you worry, I was going to talk about Sonic Mania in this video. I know I've mentioned not being as into 2D Sonic as I am 3D Sonic, but I couldn't not talk about Mania. At a point, it was actually my favorite Sonic game. There were still some 3D games I hadn't played yet, but even still, it's my favorite of the 2D games. I still remember when it was announced at that Sonic event at Comic-Con in 2016, and boy, that show was a fever dream. Totino stuffed nachos, anyone? But honestly, again, as someone who is more into 3D Sonic, I was a bit more interested in Project Sonic 2017, which would later become Forces, that I wasn't expecting anything like Sonic Mania, let alone Sega being so excited to announce it that they showed the trailer twice. I swear it was actually 3 times, but I'm not 100% sure. All I know for sure is that they showed the trailer twice in a row because there was some mishap between the live audience and the stream. It was a really, really wild show. I don't even know if you can find it on like an official Sega or Sonic YouTube page at this point because they probably just want to forget it ever happened. But through all that, Mania came out and was fantastic. It was a beautiful celebration of classic Sonic with vibrant, beautiful visuals, incredible music, and a great level of refinement to the physics and gameplay to make it an incredible way to experience 2D Sonic. It's definitely a very difficult game. Let's get that right. But if you stick with it, you'll be rewarded with one of Sonic's finest adventures, and again, what I would say is Sonic's finest 2D adventure. If you haven't picked it up already, which you probably have, definitely give it a shot. Or grab that Sonic Mania Plus that had the DLC or the extra characters in it. That would probably be a much better buy. Yeah, so I didn't talk about Pokken Tournament in my 2016 video, and it probably would have been totally fine too, but I'm talking about it now. Hopefully that's good enough. Either way, I remember being very excited and a little confused when I first heard about Pokken Tournament around like 2014. A Tekken-style fighting game centered around Pokemon? It sounded like plenty of fun, albeit very much unlike anything I could have ever expected out of a Pokemon game. But then again, what do I expect out of a Pokemon game? When it comes to the spin-offs, there's literally a game where you talk to Pikachu using a sorry excuse for a mouse, and there's another game where you make Pikachu watch TV. I guess a fighting game isn't that out of character. Now, I did play the game a bit back on the Wii U, but I never beat it at the time, and I wouldn't end up beating it until this version came out on the Switch. I wanted Pokken Tournament DX because it featured more characters, and that alone was good enough for me in a fighting game. Oh, and naturally with a lot of Switch games, the portability factor was a huge plus. And honestly, this is a very well-made fighting game. It's not the deepest or most technical one you'll ever play, but it does actually have a fair learning curve to it that makes you want to keep playing and improving. I also love how varied the characters are and how unique they feel. And the game comes packed with a ton of replay value. It's a very unique Pokemon spin-off that's a lot of fun to play, and honestly, I'm surprised they haven't tried something like this again. As someone that has a huge affinity for Pokemon spin-offs, I'd love to see what they could do with a follow-up to this game. Yeah. This only just recently made my list because of the re-release Doki Doki Literature Club Plus coming to PS Plus just recently. And before you say anything, no, the rest of this list will not be lined with a bunch of visual novels. I don't play many of them. Matter of fact, this and The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog are the only ones I've actually played and beaten. And I guess Neon White has visual novel elements, but that's kinda different. Still, yes, Doki Doki Literature Club. Chances are, you already know about this one. A visual novel that appears to be your typical anime-style dating sim that turns out to have a much darker twist under the hood. I won't necessarily spoil said twist here, though honestly, most of you probably already know what it is. The cat's been out of the bag for 7 years now. I'll spare those that don't know, but yes, even as someone who went into the game knowing the twist, I had a good time with it. Even as a visual novel, which is obviously inherently gameplay light, I still enjoyed myself. Sure, I will agree with the sentiment that once the cat's out of the bag, the game does lose a little something, but I think the characters are actually quite charming, and I respect the game for being so what it is. Even after beating it and getting the best ending, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I even went back for the Platinum Trophy, so that's gotta be worth something, right? Obviously, with a game like this, know thyself. If you're not into visual novels, you might not dig what this is doing, because visual novels are so inherently light on gameplay, but if you stick with it, I think you'll be rewarded. PM died for this. If I could sweat on command, I'd be doing it right now. Cuphead, a game I distinctly remember very much looking forward to before it came out. I mean, a run-and-gun game with an old-school aesthetic throwing things back to the golden age of animation, sign me the fuck up. But then I play the game, and I got my ass kicked. Yeah, you guys know, but this game is unbelievably hard. I can't lie, I had to play it in co-op with my brother to actually beat it, and this was also probably the first game to ever actually have an effect on me mentally. Because as someone who has what I believe to be some form of ADHD, playing Cuphead left me overstimulated the entire time. And it wasn't just the difficulty, it was the fact that the visual style is so busy that keeping up with it all was just super overwhelming. So it's a hard game to play for more than just the difficulty, but the game as a whole is obviously still very good. The sheer amount of creativity on display here is obviously fantastic, and the fact that it was made with such a small team is incredible, even if it's a very hard game to properly recommend. Maybe some of you might be better served just watching a playthrough online or playing it in co-op with a buddy like I said, but even so, it's definitely a great game. Just a very overwhelming one. And lastly, in the cream before the crop, would you believe I once dropped this game? Yeah, I kick myself all the time for ever sleeping on a hat in time. I don't know what it was that made me not crazy about it when I first played it, but I at one point dropped it and was like, this isn't really for me. 4 years later, I gave the game another chance, and boy howdy, I couldn't have been more wrong. A Hat in Time is absolutely wonderful. If you don't know what it is, A Hat in Time is a 3D platformer that's basically made as an intentional throwback to collectathon platformers of the 90s. Games like Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Spyro the Dragon, etc., etc. This was not the only major collectathon platformer throwback released in 2017, but the other one, I'd prefer not to talk about. But A Hat in Time works because even though it's a throwback, it doesn't feel like an old platformer. It feels like an old school platformer with enough modern touch-ups to stay fresh and carve out its own unique lane. It's a love letter to platformers of old while also happening to be incredibly fun on its own. I'd also say that with the game now having a 60 frames per second patch on next-gen consoles, there's no better time than now to give it a spin if you haven't already. It's a really great game and a beautiful ode to one of my favorite genres of gaming, probably my favorite genre of gaming. And I highly recommend trying it out if you haven't already. So that's just the cream before the crop. Now we can get into the best list, and before we do, there is an honorable mention. There was one re-release in 2017 that would have gotten a 10 out of 10 for me, and it's one you won't be surprised to hear me talk about, but I'm going to say it anyway. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Yeah, I didn't know I was going to bring it up somewhere, because Mario Kart 8 is one of my all-time favorite games, and Nintendo somehow managed to make one of the best games ever even better. Figure that shit out. And ultimately, this was probably one of the smartest business moves one could make. Take the Wii U's highest selling game in a franchise that moves units like hotcakes, add more characters, improve the battle mode, have it ready close enough to the Switch's launch, and boom! Profit. They also did add some nice quality of life improvements to an already great game, like the ability to hold 2 items, and just some nice features for beginners as well. And while this part did take a long time, they did eventually add more new courses. And by more new courses, I mean a whole new game's worth of courses in the Booster Course pack. And I know there's some talk about elements of the Booster Course pass, like how the graphics went down a peg or this or that. But honestly, I don't care. The sheer amount that came with this pass was worth the price of admission, and it made one of my favorite games of all time even better. Chances are you have this game or you have friends and family that do, and honestly, having lived through the Wii U era and this being my favorite Wii U game, I'm really glad to see it get the success it so rightly deserved on that console on the Switch now. So now onto the proper best list, and we have 7 games to talk about here. Again, I gave a lot of 10 out of 10s in 2017 because we had some really, really great games. Starting with my number 7 spot, a game that is probably going to be a surprise to many of you. Some of you might not even know what it is, but I'm gonna go with RiME. You probably weren't expecting to see this game on this list at all, let alone in my best list, but yes, I do actually really enjoy RiME. Let it be known that at the time this game came out, I wasn't really into artful games like it. I hadn't played any of the games that really inspired it, like Journey or the Team Ico games. Ico, not Ico. So a game like this was very out of left field for me, but something drew me to it, and I gave it a shot, especially because it was available for a lower price tag. And for one reason or another, I absolutely fell in love with it. I was genuinely moved by how emotional the writing was and how beautiful and sweeping the visuals were, that I just had a lot of trouble putting it down. And even as someone who is very gameplay first, that therefore shouldn't be as into a game as gameplay light as this, I still found myself really compelled by the puzzles. I acknowledge that it's definitely not for everyone, and people are probably going to think I'm overrating it a fair bit. Hell, I haven't played it in years, so who knows, maybe my opinion might change if I go back to it. But I still adore the game, and I definitely think it's worth a shot so long as these kinds of games are your thing. At number 6, moving over to the handheld side of things, I gotta go with Metroid Samus Returns. Yes, as we continue in potential hot take central, we have right here my favorite 2D Metroid game. I couldn't tell you why or what made it top the other entries, but this one just happened to be my favorite. Metroid Samus Returns is the 3DS remake of Metroid 2 Return of Samus, and it's also the last 3DS game we're going to be talking about in this series. While Nintendo did release a few 3DS games after this, I didn't play them. A lot of them were re-releases and whatnot, and while they tried to keep the 3DS alive alongside the Switch, yeah, there was no way that was going to happen. Still, what a swan song, in my opinion, this was for the 3DS. Mercury Steam was handed the reins of the Metroid series, which was a huge risk given their much smaller status along with how critically acclaimed Metroid is. So yeah, hey guys, no pressure. But they took the bull by the horns and made something really special here. While playing, you can really feel just how much the team loved and respected the Metroid franchise, and that level of care shines in how the game feels, the level design, the overall gameplay, everything about it just shines. The Metroid series had been in a bit of a slump between Metroid Other M and Metroid Prime Federation Force, and the sheer length of time between major games was obviously rough, but it was great to see the series come back guns blazing with this one. And Nintendo must have agreed, given that they let Mercury Steam continue to handle the Metroid series. More on that later. At number 5, moving to a game that's on the entirely different spectrum of Metroid, I gotta go with Wolfenstein II: The New Colossus. Talk about an improvement. Wolfenstein: The New Order was a pretty good game, but nothing I found to be an absolute masterpiece. But Wolfenstein II: The New Colossus, on the other hand, is an incredible game. It took what the first game did and pretty much improved on every problem that I had with it, making for a game with smoother controls, better gunplay, and far more interesting level design, making this really a wholesale improvement over the first game. I also think the writing is very good. I enjoyed Blasco's development and the side characters as well. And I think the story as a whole packed a lot of genuine emotion while also having some solid comic relief in it as well. It really utilized the alternate history angle to great effect, making for a first-person shooter that was definitely the complete package. Oh, and General Engel is a truly terrifying villain. I feel like everyone already knew that, but I just thought it should be reminded. I may not be the biggest Bethesda player on the planet, I don't really play the Bethesda Game Studios games, but I'm always excited whenever it's id Software or Machine Games at the helm, and Wolfenstein 2 is by far one of Machine Games' best works. I hope we get a Wolfenstein 3 at some point, but I understand they're busy with Indiana Jones right now. To wit, I hope that game comes out and ends up being amazing, because even as a non-fan of Indiana Jones, it looks great. At number 4, as I lose my voice by the minute, a game that will probably make you lose your voice from screaming because it's scary, I gotta go with Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. You know, it's been a minute since I talked about Resident Evil in this series, and it's high time I fix that. Also, shout out to that transition, that was awesome. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, or as it's known in Japan, Biohazard 7 Resident Evil, Tee-hee, was the first mainline Resident Evil game in 5 years, and talk about being a massive change of pace for the series. For the longest time, Resident Evil was a third-person game, but with Biohazard, the series moved into a fully first-person style, something that was, at the time, a cause for at least a little bit of controversy, and more than a few comparisons to things like PT. But the game came out and was a massive shot in the arm that the franchise needed after some of its then recent titles, and on a personal level, it's not only one of my favorites in the series, but I'd probably go as far as to say it's probably the scariest game that I've personally played. At least not counting games that rely on jump scares and things like that. The first-person perspective helps aid the absolutely terrifying atmosphere of the Baker's house, and it helps that the Bakers themselves are genuinely horrifying characters. And that level of scariness is very welcome for a franchise that, for its previous few entries, felt like it was leaning a little too hard on action style, so it was great to see it go back to what Resident Evil was known for. Horror. Add to it that the overall gameplay feels fresh and exciting on top of the scare factor, and you have one of the franchise's finest hours. Even as someone who only got into the franchise a few years ago, I remember following it for a fair bit, and it felt like Resident Evil was stuck in quite a funk for the early to mid-2010s. The same could honestly be said for Capcom as a publisher, but Resident Evil 7 felt like a confident statement that the Resident Evil franchise, and Capcom as a whole, we're back big time, and they've only continued to stay on that level since. At number 3, a game that probably might be at the top of a lot of your lists, and a game that I greatly love, I gotta go with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I know what you're thinking. Yes, there are actually 2 games that I'd put ahead of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on my list. I'll give you a few seconds to be shocked. Okay, that's enough, calm down. But don't get it twisted, Breath of the Wild is still a masterpiece of a game. It took a long time for it to release. We had first heard about it in January 2013 as a Wii U game, but it kept getting delayed. Nintendo went mum on it, and it went from being a Wii U killer app to a cross-gen release on the Wii U and the Switch. Naturally, it's Zelda, so it was under a lot of pressure to continue raising the bar, but Breath of the Wild raised that bar to a degree the Zelda series hadn't seen in a long time. I always say, and I don't mean this in a bad way, that every Zelda game from Majora's Mask through Skyward Sword felt like it was Ocarina of Time, but with some new touches. But Breath of the Wild was a total U-turn for the franchise into open world territory. Even as someone who's very picky with my open world games, I was consistently wowed by Breath of the Wild and its overall freedom. The ability to go wherever you desired, and the fact that you could technically run straight to Ganon if you wanted, though I don't recommend it, was awesome. And it's crazy how much they packed in here. Even after spending 30 hours beating the game, I only completed 6.78% of the overall package. They really jammed a lot of content in here. And they did it fantastically in an open world setting, and even brought some strong emotion to the story with great voice acting as well. Rare to say that about Zelda. I would honestly say Breath of the Wild is by far one of the most important games of the last decade or so, and even if it wasn't my own game of the year in 2017, don't let that fool you. It's an incredible game. But like I said, there are 2 games I would put ahead of it, starting at the number 2 spot, a PlayStation game that I put ahead of it. I honestly gotta go with Horizon Zero Dawn. This might surprise you even more, but yes, I did actually enjoy Horizon Zero Dawn more than Breath of the Wild. Though the 2 could probably interchange, but nevertheless, I adore this game. I had never actually played any of Guerrilla Games' games before this one. I slept through Killzone when that was making the rounds, but I remember falling head over heels for this game as soon as I saw it for the first time at E3 2015. It just seemed like such a unique and different take on the post-apocalyptic open world formula, and it was a game I had to have. It was especially crazy because that E3, it followed up on the re-announcement of The Last Guardian, which was pretty hype given that game's development cycle, but this more than outshined that. It genuinely blew me away, and when I finally played it, I was just as much as in love with it. It's such a vast and beautiful game that I never got upset about getting lost in because it just felt that good to explore. It also fantastically blended stealth with action RPG and open world designs in a way that felt so confident out of Guerrilla. The combat does take some getting used to, but once you do get used to it, it's an absolute blast. The story is also fantastically character driven, and Aloy is such an amazing protagonist. Truly captivating, and Ashley Birch really brings her to life too. I know this game tends to get a lot of I don't see the appeal comments now, but personally, I love Horizon Zero Dawn, and it's still one of my favorite PlayStation 4 era first-party titles out of Sony. No idea why it needed a remaster recently, but at least it had a $10 upgrade path. Your move, Last of Us Part 1 and Until Dawn remake. But there's still one more game to go. My favorite game of 2017... You already know. I'm not even going to beat around the bush. My favorite game of 2017, obviously, Super Mario Odyssey. I mean, I've said it several times before, but it's only my all-time favorite video game. Did you expect anything else to go in the spot? Super Mario Odyssey is the kind of game I could sit here for an hour and wax poetic about if I tried hard enough, but I can't right now because I barely have a voice and I have 1 bar of battery on my camera. It's a game that means the world to me, and even though I've talked about Super Smash Bros. Being my favorite video game series, and up to this point in 2017, Melee was my all-time favorite game, Odyssey just outdid anything I could have ever expected, and was the kind of game that I just never wanted to put down. Even when I first saw this game in that Switch reveal video, I was pumped at the idea of Nintendo actually going back to a more open-ended style 3D platforming a la Mario 64 or Sunshine, as opposed to things they were doing with like 3D World, which was still a great game, but it was kind of more like the 2D style of game, but it happened to be in 3D. And when I saw the more extended look at it at the January 2017 showcase, my brain absolutely melted. And playing the game did the exact same for me. It's a love letter to the classic entries in the franchise, but it also evolves the formula in new and exciting ways to keep things really, really fresh. I love the new possibilities afforded to the platforming thanks to Cappy. Being able to capture so many things with him was really awesome. Capturing the T-Rex was pretty badass. And the sheer amount of content in this game is absolutely worth going for. I collected all the moons in the game myself and got to 999 power moons, and I remember feeling so proud of myself. And I enjoyed every second of going for every collectible because this is just such a creative, inventive, and varied platformer that feels like the culmination of everything Nintendo has ever done with the franchise and with their games as a whole. I can definitely understand why Nintendo has taken its time with the next 3D Mario game, because it is going to be tough to follow up on something this incredible. It's a game that probably took me about 50 hours to collect everything in, which is a very long time for me. I don't play a lot of long games like that, but honestly, I kind of want to go and do it all again. Truly beautiful game. Like I said, my absolute favorite game of all time, and an absolutely unforgettable experience from start to beautiful tear-inducing finish. Because yes, getting that final Power Moon did actually make me feel like I was going to start crying. I felt very accomplished, and Nintendo should feel very accomplished for what they did with this game. My all-time favorite video game, absolutely. Super Mario Odyssey means the world to me. Cappy's off to Nintendo for everything they did with this one. Okay, I can't believe I made it through. I'm sorry if some parts of that video felt a little quicker, if it felt like I was rushing a little bit, but I just didn't want this video to go on forever given how many games I was going to be talking about. Either way, yeah, 2017, awesome year for games. One of my all-time favorites. And 2018 might look a little slower, but there's still a lot of amazing games from 2018 that I can't wait to talk about. Once I have a voice, because doing 2 videos today that were very long and being a little loud at some points of them has made me feel like I'm losing my voice, so I need to go rest. I need to rest, I need to take a shower, and I need to find out what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight. Nevertheless, this was all just my opinion on 2017 as a year in gaming. What were some of your favorite games from the year? What were some memories you had from 2017 in gaming? What were your favorite games of the year? Some other games that I didn't mention. Some games that had a huge impact on you. And of course, I like to ask a question specific to each video. So for this one, the one that I'm going to ask is pretty obvious. What's your Nintendo Switch experience? Were you there at launch? Did you get the Switch right away? Did you wait until something else came out? I myself actually remember the Switch was my first midnight launch, so that was pretty damn awesome. I kind of miss that feeling of going to a midnight launch for a video game or a game console. But what were your experiences with the Switch and with games in 2017 as a whole? Whatever your thoughts, opinions, and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And like I said, 2018 videos coming next. Probably, hopefully I don't take too long to edit this, and then the next video that you see isn't a year-end video. I'll try to get the 2018 video out next, but I need a break. I mean, I can't believe I even have anything resembling a voice right now. Hopefully I can get these videos edited quick enough and continue doing the series very soon. So stay tuned for that, but until next time, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.